You're not separate from the version of you that already holds everything you keep chasing. You're entangled with it, right now, inside the quantum field, broadcasting a vibration you don't even notice you're sending. And here's the twist nobody ever tells you: manifestation isn't about wanting, asking, or begging. It's about the observer you choose to be. The identity behind the signal is the code, and most people never touch that part. They keep trying to change the timeline while staying loyal to the same old observer. The mystical, and slightly unsettling, truth is this: your dream life isn't in the future. It's a frequency that already exists, humming quietly in a timeline that's waiting for you to tune into it. If the version of you that already lives that reality is real, and it is, the question isn't whether your dream life exists. The real question is way more uncomfortable: why aren't you in coherence with it yet? Why hasn't your vibration locked onto that signal? That's the part that stings, because it reveals how identity loops run deeper than desire. Think about it. You say you want expansion, abundance, freedom, yet your nervous system keeps choosing the familiar frequency of survival. You say you're ready for a new timeline, but your body echoes old fears, old patterns, old versions of you. That vibrational echo keeps anchoring you to the timeline you say you want to leave. And from that place, your field doesn't respond to wishing. It responds to the observer you're being, not the one you hope to become someday. This is why life feels stuck. Why goals feel distant. Why self-sabotage feels like an invisible hand tugging you backward. You're not failing. You're simply entangled with a version of you that's misaligned with the life you claim you want. Every moment, a timeline is collapsing, just rarely the one you intend to collapse. And this is where the mystery becomes magnetic: if you changed the observer, even slightly, the field would reorganize instantly. It wouldn't have a choice. Coherence is the law. So let me take you by the hand and walk you into something deeper: not manifestation the way you learned it, but manifestation as identity collapse and frequency recalibration. Not wanting, but being. Not chasing, but anchoring. Not imagining, but choosing the version of you that already exists in the quantum field. Because in a moment, we're going to start jumping timelines consciously, and once you understand how to collapse the old identity, the rest unfolds almost automatically. But first, you need to know why this entanglement is the code, and why you've felt its pull your whole life. When people hear quantum entanglement, they usually imagine some obscure scientific riddle buried in a physics lab, but the truth is shockingly intimate. Entanglement simply means two things connected so deeply that distance doesn't matter: change one, and the other shifts instantly. And here's the part that quietly rewires your entire understanding of manifestation: consciousness behaves the same way. The observer isn't isolated. Your identity is not floating alone. You are already entangled with a version of you vibrating in another timeline, one that moves with clarity, coherence, confidence, and the quantum field listens to whichever signal you broadcast most consistently. Think of the classic example: two photons created together, drifting miles apart, yet responding as one. Now imagine your timelines like that: multiple versions of you scattered across the quantum field, each one emitting a unique frequency, each one representing a different identity loop. One version of you is stuck in survival. Another is quietly thriving. Another is bold, aligned, making decisions from expansion instead of fear. You're not trying to become these versions, you're already entangled with them. The question is simply, which version of you is your nervous system most coherent with right now? That is the timeline you're collapsing into every single day. Most people unintentionally stay entangled with the version of themselves that's exhausted, doubtful, or hyper-attached to old patterns. They think they're making choices, but their familiar vibration, the echo of old emotions, old beliefs, old stories, is making the choices for them. That echo becomes a looping signal inside the quantum field, telling reality, this is the observer I am. This is the identity I'm consistent with. And the field, operating with perfect coherence, mirrors that frequency without hesitation. Not because it's punishing you, but because consistency creates collapse. That's the code. Whatever identity is most stable becomes the timeline that solidifies. This is why so many people feel stuck. They say they want abundance, but their internal frequency is calibrated to a version of them that fears losing. They say they want a new relationship, but their vibration is entangled with the version that doesn't trust connection. They say they're ready for a new timeline, but their body still flinches with the familiar vibration of the old one. And when the nervous system keeps echoing survival mode, your field keeps collapsing the same identity loop. Not because you're broken, because you're coherent with a version of you that is still choosing limitation. Entanglement works whether you use it consciously or not. But here's the shift that opens the door: if entanglement is real, and it is, then quantum jumping isn't magic, it's identity mechanics. It's the art of aligning with a different version of you and letting that signal reorganize your timeline. A real quantum jump doesn't happen through wishful thinking, it happens through altering the observer. When you recalibrate your frequency, your posture, your decisions, your emotional baseline, you stop feeding the old timeline and begin collapsing into the new one. And once you understand that, you'll realize why manifestation fails for most people, and why shifting the observer changes everything that comes next. Most people swear that manifestation doesn't work, but the truth is far more uncomfortable: it actually works with absolute precision. It just responds to the version of you that is broadcasting the dominant signal, not the version of you that's daydreaming about change. The quantum field doesn't care about the vision board you created at 2 a.m. It doesn't care about the affirmation you repeated while scrolling on your phone. It cares about your coherence, the frequency that your identity is consistently anchored in. And if your internal signal is still vibrating at the level of doubt, hesitation, or emotional survival, then that is the timeline being collapsed every single day, no matter what you say you want. This is the part that most teachers avoid because it breaks the comforting fantasy of just think positive. Wanting doesn't move timelines. Begging doesn't shift vibration. Asking the universe like you're sending a polite email doesn't change your entanglement. The field doesn't respond to wanting because wanting is the vibration of distance. Wanting says, I am not it. And the quantum field mirrors that signal with painful accuracy. The observer is always the code. You can visualize a new timeline all day, but if your nervous system is entangled with a version of you that doesn't believe it, doesn't act like it, doesn't embody it, then your visualization becomes nothing more than mental decoration. Look at the people who feel the most frustrated with manifestation. They're not lazy or unwilling. They're often the ones trying the hardest: scripting, journaling, meditating, repeating affirmations. Yet underneath all that effort, the identity running the show is still anchored in the old frequency. Their actions come from lack, not embodiment, from fear, not coherence, from desperation, not alignment. And the field responds exactly to that signal. Not because it's cruel, but because it's consistent. Reality bends to the observer, not to the wish. You can't force a new timeline while your internal vibration is still calibrated to the old one. You collapse what you are, not what you hope for. This is why people feel like they sabotage themselves. They're not sabotaging, they're echoing. Their nervous system is loyal to a familiar frequency, even if that frequency is painful. Familiar pain feels safer than unfamiliar truth. The brain and body love repetition, even if the repetition keeps the person stuck in a timeline they claim to hate. And so they interpret the stagnation as manifestation not working, when in reality the field is working perfectly. It's matching the vibrational echo of the observer who feels small, doubtful, or undeserving. The identity loop becomes the gravitational center of the timeline, and everything collapses around it with absolute coherence. Think about someone trying to manifest abundance while feeling terrified of spending money. Every financial decision vibrates with the signal of scarcity. Their posture tightens, their breathing shortens, their mind enters threat mode. That vibration, not the affirmation, is what the quantum field locks onto. Or consider the person trying to manifest love while deeply entangled with the version of themselves that fears abandonment. Their actions become protective, closed, strategic. They're not choosing a new reality, they're defending the old wound. And the universe, responding to the observer, mirrors that exact frequency. Not as punishment, but as coherence. This is the painful beauty of the quantum field: it doesn't respond to effort, emotion, or fantasy. It responds to identity. To the embodied version of you that is most stabilized. This is why manifestation can feel brutally slow for some people and instant for others. The ones who shift fast aren't lucky, they're coherent. Their internal frequency matches their desired timeline, and the field collapses into the new reality effortlessly. The ones who struggle aren't failing, they're entangled with a version of themselves that doesn't allow the shift. Their observer is stuck in an old signal. And until that identity collapses, no amount of desire can override the vibration they're anchoring. So the real question isn't why manifestation doesn't work, it's why your internal signal hasn't changed. Why the observer hasn't shifted. Why the version of you broadcasting into the quantum field is still entangled with fear, memory, habit, or an outdated self-perception. And when you understand that, everything changes. Because if you can change the observer, the timeline will collapse into coherence. But this requires something deeper than thinking or imagining. It requires identity shift, the truest form of quantum jumping. And that's exactly where we're heading next, redefining the jump itself. People imagine a quantum jump as a dramatic, cinematic moment, a flash of light, a mystical shift, a sudden teleportation into a new reality. But the real jump is far quieter and far more disruptive. It doesn't happen in the external world first. It happens in the observer. It happens in the identity that is generating the frequency, the vibration, the signal that the quantum field is mirroring back. A true quantum jump is not something you do. It's something you become. It's the moment the version of you that's been running your life finally collapses, and a new identity takes the seat of the observer. That collapse is the code. Every timeline you've ever lived has been shaped not by your actions, but by the identity behind them. Actions are surface level, identity is the architecture. And the quantum field responds to that architecture with absolute consistency. This is why people repeat the same patterns for years. The observer, the version of them that chooses, interprets, reacts, hasn't changed. They try new habits, new routines, new goals, but the identity generating those behaviors is still entangled with an old frequency. So the timeline loops. The signal stays the same. The field collapses into the same reality, again and again. Not because change is impossible, but because the observer hasn't shifted. A real quantum jump begins the moment you ask the most dangerous and liberating question: who is the version of me that is currently choosing this life? Not the version you wish you were. Not the version you perform for others. The version of you whose frequency is actually being broadcast into the quantum field right now. That question is uncomfortable because it strips away illusions. It reveals the identity loops you've been living inside without realizing it. And once you see the observer, you can no longer pretend that your timelines are random. You realize they have been coherent, painfully coherent, with the identity you've been embodying. This is why identity collapse is essential. You cannot jump into a new timeline while giving CPR to the old self. People want a new life without losing the version of themselves that created the old one. They want expansion without death. But in the quantum field, that's not how collapse works. For a new timeline to stabilize, the old observer must stop broadcasting. The old frequency must lose coherence. The old identity must be released, not judged, not fought, but allowed to die with dignity. And yes, it feels like a funeral. It feels like letting go of a familiar echo in your nervous system. That echo is strong because it kept you alive. But survival frequency can never unlock expansion. Think of someone who wants abundance while staying entangled with the identity of the struggler. Their nervous system is wired to expect disappointment, tension, unpredictability. They make every financial decision through the lens of that observer. Even hope is filtered through fear. For that person, abundance can't stabilize, not because they're unworthy, but because their identity is inconsistent with the timeline they're trying to jump into. The version of them that thrives exists, but they aren't broadcasting its signal. They're broadcasting the vibration of lack, and the field mirrors it with precision. The jump doesn't fail, it simply collapses into the most coherent identity. Identity collapse requires courage because it demands choosing uncertainty over familiarity. Pain over numbness. Truth over comfort. The old identity will resist because its entire purpose is survival. It will flood the nervous system with familiar vibrations, fear, doubt, hesitation, because those frequencies have kept you alive in previous timelines. But here's the paradox: the very frequencies that once protected you are now preventing your expansion. They are the vibrational echo of a timeline that no longer fits. And when you begin to detach, the echo grows louder at first. People mistake this noise as failure, when in reality it's the old identity fighting for relevance. This is why the shift must be conscious. You cannot wait to feel ready for a new identity, you become ready by embodying it before your environment reflects it. This is where the real quantum jump happens, in the micro choices. In the posture you adopt when fear rises. In the tone you use when speaking to yourself. In the way you hold your breath or release it. In the stories you stop telling. In the decisions you stop postponing. These subtle shifts recalibrate your frequency. They anchor you into a new identity long before the timeline visibly updates. And the quantum field, sensing that new coherence, begins collapsing old possibilities and stabilizing the new signal. A true quantum jump feels less like a miracle and more like a quiet internal click. Something inside you stops negotiating with your old self. The observer steps forward with clarity. You feel a subtle shift in your center, a sense of, "I'm done being this," not from anger but from truth. And that moment, although invisible to the outside world, is when the old timeline begins to dissolve. Your decisions change. Your frequency changes. Your entanglement changes. You stop vibrating from the identity that survived life and begin vibrating from the identity that creates life. The shift is profound because it is internal, and everything external eventually aligns. The real magic isn't that you jumped into another timeline. The magic is that you finally stopped being loyal to the older version of you. You stopped feeding it with thought, emotion, attention, breath. You allowed it to collapse. And because the observer changed, the field had to reorganize. That's coherence. That's alignment. That's the quantum field doing exactly what it's designed to do. And once that identity stabilizes, your life begins to reflect the new signal effortlessly, not as a reward, but as a response. Which leads directly into the next stage, understanding the mechanics of the method itself, the three-part process that makes identity collapse intentional instead of accidental. There comes a point in every timeline shift where the internal chaos becomes undeniable. You feel the pull of a new identity, yet you're still tangled in the vibrational echo of the old one. This is where most people panic or retreat. They think they're blocked, when in reality they're standing at the doorway of coherence. And coherence requires conscious realignment. Not effort, not force, not begging the quantum field for a new reality. Realignment happens when the observer recalibrates through deliberate identity mechanics. That's why the shift needs a method, not a ritual, not a manifestation trick, but a way of interacting with your own field. The three parts, witness, sever, choose, are simple, but they pierce directly into the architecture of identity. The first phase, witness, is the most misunderstood because it feels passive. But witnessing is not passive at all, it's surgical. It's the moment you sit in absolute presence with the version of you that has been running your life up until now. No judgment, no resistance, no attempt to fix. You simply observe the identity that has been holding the steering wheel, the one whose frequency has been collapsing your timeline day after day. Most people skip this because looking at the old observer feels like looking in a mirror you've avoided for years. But witnessing dissolves distortion. When you see your old identity clearly, the fears it carries, the posture it defaults to, the memories it loops, it loses its illusion of power. It becomes just a version of you, not the only version of you. People often ask, how do I witness without getting pulled back into the old timeline? And the answer is coherence. When you witness consciously, you're anchoring yourself as the new observer. You're saying, I'm no longer entangled with this identity, but I'm willing to see it with compassion. The quantum field responds differently to that state. You're not feeding the old frequency, you're acknowledging it. And timelines collapse naturally when they're no longer energized. Think of it like leaving a room, you don't slam the door, you simply stop living there. Witnessing is the moment your nervous system recognizes the old self as familiar but no longer home, and the vibration begins to fade. The second phase, sever, is where the energy shifts dramatically. Severing doesn't mean hating your past or rejecting your story, it means disentangling your frequency from the identity that no longer fits. This is the part where people feel resistance, not because the new timeline is wrong, but because the old identity is fighting for its survival. That resistance is the vibrational echo of the timeline you've been living in. And it's supposed to show up. It's the sign that the collapse is happening. Severing means declaring, with clarity and without negotiation, this is no longer who I am. I release this version. I collapse this observer. The field responds instantly, because clarity is coherence, and coherence collapses timelines. Some people expect severing to feel peaceful or gentle, but often it feels like a rupture. Your body might shake, your voice might tighten, your breathing might shift. That's not a problem, that's recalibration. When a timeline breaks, the nervous system releases frequencies that were held together through habit, fear, or emotional memory. Severing interrupts the signal that's been looping through your field, and the body reacts as it updates. It's the spiritual equivalent of turning off an outdated operating system. This discomfort is not the collapse failing, it's the collapse working. The old identity doesn't vanish without protest, it fades as you stop giving it coherence. Then comes the third phase, choose, the anchor point of the new timeline. Choosing is the moment you consciously align with the new version of you, not as a fantasy, but as a lived frequency. This is where embodiment becomes everything. You don't choose through thought, you choose through posture, tone, breath, decisions. Every micro-action becomes a broadcast into the quantum field, saying, this is the version of me I am coherent with now. And the field responds, not because you're making a perfect choice, but because you're making a consistent one. Consistency stabilizes identity, identity stabilizes timeline, timeline stabilizes reality. This phase is where people often overcomplicate things. They think choosing a new timeline means performing confidence or pretending everything is fine. That's not coherence, that's denial. Choosing is subtle. If the version of you that lives in abundance stands differently, breathe like that now. If the version of you that speaks with authority uses fewer apologetic phrases, shift that today. If the version of you that is healed sets boundaries cleanly, practice that in one small conversation. These small signals recalibrate the field far more powerfully than large dramatic gestures. Quantum jumps are not giant leaps, they are consistent micro-choices anchored in a new vibrational identity. Here's the part nobody talks about, choosing isn't comfortable at first. The old identity echoes. The new frequency feels unfamiliar. Your body searches for the old timeline because it was stable, even if it wasn't supportive. But choosing is the moment you say, I'm done vibrating from fear, not through force but through alignment. It's the moment coherence overrides habit. It's the moment the quantum field starts reorganizing around your new signal because it finally has something consistent to work with. This is where people begin to see synchronicities, opportunities, shifts in behavior from others, not because reality magically transformed, but because the observer did. The power of these 3 steps is that they turn the quantum jump into a deliberate identity shift instead of an accidental one. Witness shows you the old observer. Sever collapses its coherence. Choose anchors the new signal. And when you move through these steps with intention, you stop being a passive participant in your timeline and become an active architect of it. The new identity doesn't just appear, it stabilizes. And once it stabilizes, the next phase becomes unavoidable, the recalibration that happens after the jump, when the field shakes loose the remnants of the old timeline and tests the stability of the new one. Most people think the quantum jump ends the moment they choose the new identity. But that's actually where the real turbulence begins. After the jump comes the recalibration, the phase almost nobody warns you about. This is the period where your field is reorganizing, your nervous system is rewiring, and the old timeline is echoing loudly as it dies. And because this part feels messy, people often misinterpret it as failure. But discomfort after a shift isn't a sign that the jump didn't work. It's the evidence that the old observer is losing coherence. Recalibration shows up in unexpected ways. People around you might react differently, sometimes with confusion, sometimes with resistance, because they're still entangled with your previous frequency. Old relationships tremble because they were built around an identity you no longer embody. Emotional waves rise as your system releases the vibrational memory of the timeline you've just collapsed. Even your thoughts may feel out of place, like leftovers from a version of you that's fading. This period feels disorienting because you're stabilizing a new signal while dismantling the old one. The most common mistake during recalibration is assuming that the discomfort means you've slipped back. But discomfort is not regression. Discomfort is the old frequency burning out. It's the vibrational echo of a version of you that no longer has authority, only habit. Think of it like hearing the last bit of static after changing radio stations. The signal you're hearing isn't the new channel malfunctioning, it's the old one fading. But people panic at this echo and unconsciously re-entangle with their previous identity. The field isn't punishing them, they're simply returning to the frequency they're most familiar with. This is why the post-jump phase requires awareness. You have to recognize that your nervous system is recalibrating to a frequency it hasn't stabilized yet. That means emotional intensity is normal. It means external friction is normal. It means synchronization might lag for a bit because the quantum field updates identity first, environment second. Reality is not slow, it's consistent. It waits for the new observer to become coherent before it collapses fully into the new timeline. And if you interpret the temporary instability as proof that nothing changed, you end up collapsing the wrong timeline again. During recalibration, your job isn't to force alignment, it's to hold it. To respond from the new identity even when your reality still echoes the old one. If the new version of you is grounded, speak from that frequency when anxiety rises. If the new version is abundant, make one small choice from abundance even when the bank account hasn't caught up. If the new version is healed, respond as wholeness even if your mind tries to replay old pain. Every moment becomes an opportunity to reinforce the signal. Recalibration isn't about perfection, it's about consistency. Think of recalibration like breaking in new neural circuitry. You're teaching your body to accept the new signal as the default. You're teaching your field to stabilize around the new observer. And yes, the old identity will try to pull you back, not because it's powerful, but because it's familiar. Familiarity has momentum. But familiarity is not fate. When you recognize that the intensity you're feeling is just old code dissolving, you stop fighting the process and start participating in it consciously. And here's the paradox that frees you: the chaos after the jump isn't a warning, it's confirmation. It's the quantum field rearranging around a new identity. It's the timeline stabilizing. It's the old observer losing coherence. Once you understand this, the recalibration phase stops feeling like a crisis and starts feeling like proof. And this is exactly what prepares you for the next stage, anchoring the new timeline with stability instead of emotional volatility. Anchoring is where the new timeline stops being a possibility and starts becoming your lived reality. But most people misunderstand anchoring because they think it means performing confidence, repeating affirmations louder, or pretending everything is perfect. That's not anchoring, that's resistance dressed as positivity. Anchoring is much quieter and far more powerful. It's about responding to life as the new observer even when your outer world hasn't fully caught up yet. It's coherence in motion. It's the moment your frequency becomes consistent enough that the quantum field reorganizes around it without hesitation. The key to anchoring is understanding that the environment is always the last thing to update. Identity shifts first. Frequency stabilizes second. Reality collapses third. So when your external circumstances still reflect the old timeline, it doesn't mean the jump failed, it means the update is still in progress. Your job during anchoring is not to force the field to change, but to stop broadcasting the old signal. When the bank account looks low, but the new version of you holds a frequency of grounded abundance, you respond from that state. Not with denial, but with coherence. The field doesn't respond to desperate effort, it responds to consistent identity. Anchoring looks different for every person, but the principle is the same: behave as the version of you that's already stabilized in the new timeline. If that version sets boundaries cleanly, you practice one boundary today. If that version breathes slower instead of spiraling into panic, you shift your breath even once. If that version invests in themselves instead of hesitating, you make a decision aligned with that signal, even if it's small. Anchoring isn't about massive changes, it's about micro-stabilization. Every small choice strengthens the coherence of your new frequency. The biggest trap during anchoring is slipping into performance. People think they need to act like the new identity. But acting isn't embodiment. Performing is rooted in insecurity, embodiment is rooted in truth. You're not trying to prove anything to the field. You're communicating with it through vibration, not theatrics. If you feel fear, acknowledge it, but respond from the new observer. If you feel doubt, witness it, but choose from the new state. Consistency is what stabilizes the signal. Even 70% embodiment is more powerful than 100% performance. The field feels vibration, not pretense. Anchoring also means refusing to go back into negotiations with the old identity. Once a timeline collapses, the old version of you will try to pull you back with familiar habits, familiar thoughts, familiar emotional reactions. Not because it's strong, but because it's predictable. The old frequency wants coherence too, and it will try to reclaim it. But anchoring is the moment you stop entertaining those vibrations as truth. You recognize them as echoes, not identity. Your nervous system may still send old signals, but you no longer align your choices with those signals. This is where the new timeline begins to solidify. Something powerful happens when you maintain this consistency. Life starts to respond as if you've always been this version of you. Opportunities appear that match your new frequency. Conversations take a different tone. People treat you differently without knowing why. Your decisions become cleaner, your energy more grounded, your emotional reactions less chaotic. This isn't luck, it's coherence. The quantum field is simply mirroring the identity that has stabilized. You're no longer hoping for the new timeline, you're living from it. And when you live from it long enough, it becomes normal. Reality doesn't feel magical anymore, it feels aligned. Anchoring is the bridge between collapse and integration. It's the moment where identity becomes reality. And once this stability sets in, you move into the final phase of the process, the state where the new self becomes your default, and the old version feels like a distant memory that never fully belonged to you. Integration is the moment the new identity stops feeling like a performance and starts feeling like home. It's subtle. There's no big fireworks, no dramatic signal from the quantum field. Instead, there's a quiet shift, a sense that the version of you you've been embodying is no longer something you have to remember to be. It's simply who you are now. The vibration stabilizes. The signal becomes effortless. And the timeline that once felt aspirational now feels obvious, almost unavoidable. This is the point where people realize that quantum jumping was never about getting somewhere, it was about dissolving the illusion that they were ever separate from this version of themselves. During integration, the old identity fades into the background like a dream you can barely recall. Its thoughts may still appear from time to time, but they feel hollow, like echoes from a field you're no longer entangled with. You don't have to fight them, they simply pass through without anchoring. Emotional triggers soften. Decision-making becomes cleaner. You no longer negotiate with yourself the way you once did. Instead of forcing alignment, you operate from alignment naturally. This is the moment where embodiment overrides effort. You're not pretending. You're not performing. You're consistent. One of the most beautiful parts of integration is how quiet it feels. There's no grand sense of achievement, because the new identity isn't a victory, it's your baseline. People sometimes expect constant bliss after a quantum jump, but integration is actually grounded, steady, deeply human. You're not escaping reality, you're participating in it from coherence. Life feels less chaotic, not because nothing challenges you, but because your observer is no longer destabilized by every wobble. The nervous system has adapted to the new frequency. The field reflects that stability right back to you. This is also where your external world begins to look like the embodiment you've been practicing. Opportunities start showing up that match your new timeline. Conversations shift. People treat you differently because they're responding to the signal you're consistently emitting. And it all feels strangely natural. Not magical, not surreal, just aligned. Like this was always supposed to be your reality. And in truth, it was. You didn't jump into a better timeline, you collapsed the distance between yourself and the version of you that already existed in the quantum field. Integration is the final click, the moment the new identity becomes your default. And once it's stable, everything that comes next feels like an expansion of who you already are, not a fight to become someone else. From here, the journey moves into something even deeper, living your new timeline with the kind of quiet confidence that turns possibility into inevitability. Here's the part most creators rush through, but in this kind of work, the call to action isn't just a button or a request. It's a calibration point. A chance to anchor the frequency you've just stepped into. When you subscribe, you're not doing it out of obligation, you're choosing to stay entangled with the field that reminds you who you're becoming. You're choosing coherence over forgetting. Because if you leave it to the algorithm, it decides when you remember your power, and that's not the kind of timeline you want to collapse into. So if this message hit you in that deep, unexplainable way, the kind that feels less like learning and more like remembering, then subscribe now. Not as a favor, but as an anchor. As a way of staying connected to the version of you that's already operating from a higher signal. Think of it like keeping a vibrational thread open with the timeline you're stepping into. Don't let random chance dictate when you reconnect with this frequency. Choose it consciously. And now, something even more important, drop a comment, but not the usual, "here's what I want" kind of comment. This isn't about desires. It's about identity. I want you to declare the reality you're ready to embody, not someday, but now. Not from longing, but from coherence. Write it as the version of you that's already living in that new timeline. Something like, "I'm already here." That sentence alone collapses distance. It signals to the field that the observer has shifted. It tells your nervous system to align with the new frequency. Words become anchors when spoken from the right identity. Be specific. Don't list what you hope for, name the timeline you're stepping into. The version of you that feels inevitable. The reality that already exists in the quantum field and is just waiting for your signal to lock onto it. When you write it down, you're broadcasting coherence. You're choosing the new observer publicly. And yes, it creates a ripple. Others see it, feel it, respond to it. That ripple is part of the jump itself. Subscribe to stay inside this field. Comment to anchor your timeline. And above all, declare your presence in the reality you're ready to live. No begging. No wishing. Just identity. Just coherence. Just the version of you that was always entangled with this frequency from the beginning.